We all think we know what Hollywood did to its actresses. The pills, the pressure, the impossible beauty standards. But there is a clause buried in MGM's standard talent contracts from 1934 that every documentary you've ever seen on this subject has walked right past. A clause that didn't just allow the studio to control these women, it gave them legal guardianship over their bodies. And once you see it, the story of Judy Garland, Frances Farmer, and a dozen others stops being a tragedy of excess and starts looking a lot more like a system. Culver City, California, 1934. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer is the most powerful studio on Earth, and somewhere in the legal department, on the 4th floor of the Thalberg Building, a new standard contract is being drafted. Not by producers, not by directors, by lawyers. Specifically by a man named J. Robert Rubin, MGM's chief legal counsel, who has one goal: to make sure that every star on that lot, every face, every voice, every body belongs to the studio. Not metaphorically, legally. This is not a story about Hollywood glamour gone wrong. This is a story about a document, and about what happened to the women who signed it before they were old enough to understand what they'd given away. Standard Hollywood history tells us the studios were demanding, that they worked their stars hard, that the culture was brutal. All of that is true, but it is also incomplete in a very specific way, because what most accounts omit is the mechanism, not the pressure, the paperwork. Section 7 of MGM's 1934 Talent Agreement, a version of which was used at Paramount, Warner Brothers, and RKO with only minor variations, contained language that film historians Janine Basinger and Carrie Beauchamp have both noted in academic contexts, but which has never made its way into mainstream documentary coverage. The clause granted the studio the right to, quote, engage medical professionals on behalf of the artist in service of the artist's professional obligations, without requiring separate written authorization. In plain language, the studio could medicate you, and you had already agreed to it. For an adult signing under financial desperation, that clause was dangerous. For a child, and many of these women were children when they signed, it was something else entirely. Because a minor cannot legally consent to a contract in California without a guardian's signature. And in dozens of cases during this era, that guardian's signature was provided by a parent who either didn't read the clause or who needed the money too badly to ask questions. In Judy Garland's case, her mother, Ethel Gumm, signed on her behalf in September 1935 when Frances Ethel Gumm was 13 years old. What is less commonly reported is that Ethel received a separate, undisclosed talent commission from MGM, a fact surfaced in Gerald Clarke's 2000 biography, sourced from studio payroll records, creating a financial incentive that directly compromised her role as her daughter's legal protector. The Judy Garland story has been told many times, and every telling includes the pills: the Benzedrine to keep her thin and alert, the phenobarbital to bring her down at night, the cycle that never stopped. But here is the piece that almost never makes it into the documentary. The prescriptions didn't come primarily from the MGM studio physician listed in the official records. According to Garland's own statements, corroborated in a largely unaired 1965 conversation with Jack Parr, many of the early medications were administered by a doctor named Marc Rabwin. Dr. Rabwin was a personal friend of Louis B. Mayer. He was not the official MGM medical officer. He had no formal contractual relationship with the studio that appears in public filings. He was, in the language of the era, a fixer's doctor, someone who could prescribe outside the official record. Why does this matter? Because it means the pharmaceutical intervention in Judy Garland's life was deliberately structured to avoid institutional accountability. If the studio physician prescribed the Benzedrine, there is a paper trail leading directly to MGM. If a personal friend of Mayer's prescribes it informally, the studio's hands are clean. Garland attempted to exit her MGM contract in 1947. The studio's response, documented in internal memos first cited by historian Scott Schechter, was not to renegotiate. It was to place her on suspension without pay, which by contract also suspended her right to seek outside employment. She was 25 years old, already dependent on the medications the studio's network had introduced her to, and legally prohibited from working anywhere else. She had no exit. Frances Farmer is typically remembered as a cautionary tale about a rebellious actress who couldn't be controlled. She drank. She fought back against the studio system. She ended up in a psychiatric institution. The implication is almost always the same. She brought it on herself. But let's look at the specific chain of events and the specific people that led to her institutionalization. Because when you follow the names, a different picture emerges. In October 1942, Farmer was arrested in Santa Monica on a charge of driving after curfew hours, a wartime regulation. She had a previous suspended sentence on a minor violation. The arrest escalated into a public spectacle largely because of the coverage it received in a column written by Jimmy Fidler, a Hollywood gossip reporter with known ties to Paramount Pictures, the same studio that had grown increasingly frustrated with Farmer's refusal to accept assigned roles. Fidler's columns on Farmer in late 1942 and early 1943 were not neutral reporting. They were a campaign. And film historian William Arnold, who wrote the definitive biography of Farmer, documented that Fidler received favorable studio access, advanced screenings, and what Arnold described as consideration from Paramount's publicity department throughout this period. Frances Farmer was committed to Western State Hospital in January 1945. The commitment was signed off by a judge in a hearing that lasted less than 5 minutes, with no psychiatric evaluation conducted in advance, a procedural violation of Washington state law that was never challenged. Her housekeeper, Hazel Pepper, gave a statement to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office on January 22, 1945, describing Farmer as, quote, frightened but entirely lucid the morning before the commitment. That statement exists in the county archive. It has never been cited in a major documentary on Frances Farmer. She spent 5 years in that institution. She emerged a different person. The studio that had used a columnist to help put her there had moved on to other stars. Lupe Velez died on December 14, 1944. She was 36 years old. And within days, a narrative formed around her death that was dramatic, specific, and almost entirely constructed. The version most people know of a glamorous actress staging a tragic, theatrical final scene comes almost entirely from Kenneth Anger's 1959 book, Hollywood Babylon. The book was scandalous, it was lurid, and it was, in substantial portions, fabricated. Here is the question that almost no one asks. Why didn't the studios sue? Hollywood Babylon made specific, provably false claims about dozens of Hollywood figures. Studios had legal teams. They had resources. Several of the people named were still alive. And yet, no litigation, no cease and desist, no formal denial from any major studio. Because the book, whatever its fabrications, served a function. It transformed these women's deaths into mythology, and mythology is the most effective way to prevent investigation. The actual Los Angeles County Sheriff's Report on Lupe Velez's death, filed December 15, 1944, describes the scene in language that is mundane and medical, not theatrical. Her housekeeper's statement describes no staging, no dramatic arrangement. The glamorous death narrative appears to have originated with a single wire service report filed by a journalist who was not present and who cited no named sources. That report became the basis for virtually every subsequent account, including Anger's embellished version 15 years later. What we've been looking at are not isolated tragedies. They are a pattern, and the pattern has a structure. Step 1. Sign the contract young, often with a financially compromised guardian. Step 2. Introduce pharmaceutical dependency through informal medical channels that don't appear in official studio records. Step 3. When the actress becomes difficult, meaning when she resists, asserts herself, or simply becomes too expensive, Activate the press, a columnist, a tip to a reporter, a strategically placed story. Step 4. If the press doesn't neutralize her, escalate to legal or medical channels. Suspension, commitment, arrest. And step 5, the step that completes the system, is myth-making. Turn the destroyed woman into a legend, a tragic icon, a story about the price of fame, a warning to the next generation of actresses about the dangers of excess, of instability, of being, as they used to say, difficult. The myth doesn't just memorialize these women, it protects the system that broke them. So it wasn't about excess, it wasn't about instability, it wasn't even really about the pills, though the pills were real and the damage they caused was real. It was about a legal architecture, built in the 1930s, refined through the 1940s, and never publicly dismantled, that classified these women's bodies as studio assets, that gave corporations the right to medicate, to restrict, to surveil, and, when necessary, to destroy the women who generated their profits. The tragedy of the golden era's actresses isn't that the system was cruel, it's that the cruelty was organized, it was documented, it was legal. These files were left open. The documents exist, and the story they tell isn't a tragedy of Hollywood excess. It's a record of what happens when an industry decides that a woman's value and her life is a balance sheet item.